I had told to Mike, who, when he asked me to tell a story to the kids, that I would tell one of my own stories, but then I thought that would be too long. I did have a very scary adventure when I was in the Congo, when my car broke down in the middle of the jungle, and for 6 days nobody came by. I was stuck there, and then I had to walk 50 kilometers to the next town, and I was, you can imagine. But when I look back, I'm glad that it happened, because I have reasons to say, what a God. What a God. You know, things happen at that time that are incredible, because when I got to that town, the police came, who are you? And in Africa, if you don't have the right paper, you're put in jail, which happened. And then they said, where do you come from? I said, I come from the Congo. I was just traveling in that other part of the country. And they said, you don't have the right to be here. You have to go back. How do I get back there? The car's broken. Just happened that the president of the country, not Adventist, the president of the country, Mobutu, was visiting that town at the time, and they said, okay, we'll put you on his plane and fly you back to where you come. My car stayed there, but I flew in the presidential jet all the way to the city with pretty hostesses to give me everything that I wanted on board, but it was a beautiful story. What a God. My father, late father, was a minister, and I remember going with him to a church, and the time was about like now, 25 to 12, and he said, brothers and sisters, how long do I have? And somebody stood up and said, Pastor Johnson, speak as long as you want, but we leave at 12. So, Pastor Zeni, I hope that this won't be the case today. What I want to talk to you about is the church, because the church, to me, is the most wonderful thing that exists on earth. Nothing else can compare, nothing else is worth comparing. The church. And my goal is to get you so excited by the church, the concept of church, that you understand that God has a place for you in that thing called church, and the place for you is to fill a certain role in God's church, and God has gifted you with what we call spiritual gifts for you to do that, to fulfill that role. So I am very open, non-apologetic. I hope that my sermon gets every one of you to come back this afternoon. Because if you are in the church and not doing anything for God, you might as well quit. Coming to church on Sabbath morning and going back home afterwards after potluck is not what church is about, as much fun as that is. So the title today is Spiritual Gifts, the believer's role in the cosmic war between good and evil. Spiritual gifts, the believer's role in the cosmic war between good and evil. Scripture, Matthew 5 verse 9, blessed are the peacemakers. When do you need peacemakers? When there's a war. It's obvious, and yet whenever you study the Beatitudes, nobody or very few ministers preach about the Beatitudes and tell you that this is given in a context of war. And the first Beatitude describes the character, the personality of God's warrior. Humility, first one, hunger for righteousness, and so forth. These are who you are. All of us Christians should have those 6 Beatitudes ingrained in us, because this is who God wants us to be. And when He gets us to be like that, then He says, you have the right personality to take part in this cosmic battle between good and evil. And as you do that, you become a peacemaker. That's the first thing I want you to understand. Now, if I were to ask you, what's the topic that comes most often in God's Word? The subject that comes over 2,000 times, verses and texts, It's the topic of oppression. Oppression in its different shapes: poverty, illness, war, broken relationships, failures. Whatever happens to you that gets you to hurt is part of oppression. We are oppressed by those things, aren't we? So oppression is the topic that comes most frequently in the Word of God. And in Isaiah chapter 1 it says, I hate your Sabbath. Imagine God telling us that today. Hey guys, I hate your Sabbath keeping. How would you feel? And he starts by saying, I hate your Sabbath, I hate your new moon and your festivities. What I want is that you look around you at those that are oppressed and you step out of your comfort zone to do something for them. That's the message of Isaiah throughout. And all the other prophets. So I'm not going to talk about oppression, I'm going to talk about spiritual gift, but it's got to be put within that context. That oppression and poverty and pain and suffering is close to God's heart. When he decided to come down here as a human being, did he come as a wealthy guy? No, he came as the poorest of the poor. And I was saying that this morning in the first service. I worked in Africa for 6 years and I've seen very, very, very poor people. I worked with the pygmies and I joked about it because I was very tall among the pygmies. And they are poor, and yet I've never seen a pygmy mother give birth with cows and donkeys or whatever in a cow shed. They still go to the medical clinic that's the closest. But that's where Jesus is born, the lowest of the low. And then when he starts his ministry, for 3.5 years, 99.9% of his work is relieving suffering. Yes or no? That's what it is. He said, I have come to free the captives, to heal the blind, to make the lame walk, and of course, to remove sin. He consecrated the majority of his mission, bringing peace and joy to the oppressed. And by the way, if I ask you, where do you find the 10 Commandments? You all know, in Exodus chapter 20. What comes in 21, 22, and 23? Very few know. You've got to read those chapters because those chapters are God's own commentary on the commandments. All of them have to do with misery and poverty and the sick and neighbors and relationships. All of those 5 chapters. And Deuteronomy is full of that. 613 rules in the first 5 books, all of them on relationships. Some of them really strange. Well, actually not strange. It says, if you dig a well, put a fence around so that your neighbor doesn't fall in there and dies. Why would God care about that? Unless suffering is something important, close to his heart. So, and finally, on the judgment day, God will not tell you, Brother Mike, how many Saturdays did you keep as Sabbath? He'll say, when I was hungry, did you feed me? When I was thirsty, did you give me a glass of water? When I was naked, did you give me a clothes to wear? When I was homeless, did you give me a place in your house to stay for a while? How many of us have got guest rooms that they use once a year only when the family comes? I won't answer that question. You think about it. I pastored a church in Toronto, Canada, a large church, 1,600 members. There were 5 ministers. I was the main pastor, if you want to call it that way. And winter in Canada can be very cold. You would know that if you've been to Canada or to Europe. Minus 20 is the usual. It's very, very cold. And at any given time, there are street people, homeless people. They sleep and they wrap themselves in newspaper, and I'm not exaggerating, and they find for those air vents because of the underground railway, warm air comes up, so they huddle around that to spend the night. And the mayor of Toronto sent a letter to all the churches Would you consider opening your church so the homeless, there were about 30,000 in Toronto at the time, would find a place to stay? Not a single church said we are willing to open the church. Our church said we can't do that. I brought it to the board. They said we can't do that, Pastor, because these people smoke, they're dirty. On Sabbath when we meet, the church will reek of smoke. God's church? Are there homeless people in this area of Brisbane? Do you have room where they could spend the night in the warmth and protected? I'm just throwing the idea out. You know, I can preach like that when I go to churches where I don't come back again because you can't lynch me after that. But that's the reality. So, why is oppression such an important topic in the Bible? That's oppressive as well. Why is oppression such an important subject in God's Word? It was not part of God's plan. Oppression is important because of what it does to people created by God, but ultimately it has to do with what it does to God's name. When people are hurting, who do they tend to blame? God. You know, even us this morning, I said that and I got a chuckle from the crowd. If I stub my toe, oh my God. I never said, oh devil. I mean, I don't say that either, neither the one or the other, but that's what you hear. It's always, oh my God. So, where does that start? The first book in the Bible is Genesis, the way it was put together. But the first book written, according to scholars, is not Genesis, it's the book of Job. And Job is an important book that you and I need to study to understand what the church is about. There is, in that story, a general assembly it's a board of directors. God calls together a board of directors. Like we do today when, if you run a business, you have that once a year to give reports. And they're sitting there. God is the chairperson. And then the door opens and somebody comes in, and his name is the adversary, Satan in English. Satan is not a name, it's a description. It means the enemy, the one who's against. And he walks in, and I want you to imagine that crowd of God's people gathered there, seeing Satan walking in. What is he doing here? The question that goes through their mind. Now God looks at him and God says, he doesn't say, what are you doing here? What does he say? Where do you come from? That's a strange question. Where do you come from? Had I been God, I would say, who gives you the right to be here? Where do you come from? And he looks at God straight in the eye and he says, I come from walking back and forth over the earth. Now, I'm sure you know this bit that I'm saying now. That was a cultural way of saying, I own this place. Of Abraham, Stephen in Acts chapter 7 says, Abraham had no place to put his foot on. He did not own the land of Canaan, so even when his wife died, he had to buy a property to bury him. So when Satan says, I've been walking up and down the earth, he was saying, I am the owner of that place. I represent that place. You've got to let me in. Now, who should have been there on that meeting rather than Satan? Adam. Adam should have been there, but he wasn't. So now God says, okay, but I've got to challenge you here. And again, imagine that crowd waiting, expecting what's going on here. And God says, all right, if you are the owner, the ruler of that place called earth, that would mean that everybody down there does your will, if you're the boss. But there's this person there. He doesn't do your will. He is a righteous man. He does not do anything against God, against my commandments, or whatever word you want to put in there. And that's a challenge. Now again, imagine you are there, and God is here talking to this guy and says, if you say that you own this place, how come this fellow here doesn't listen to you, doesn't do your thing? And Satan very smugly says, of course he does. You bribe him. That's the story. You have bought his worship. You protect him, you've given him a great family, you've given him... The story starts by saying he had 5,000 camels, 500 donkeys. I mean, you know the list. He's one of the wealthiest men in that part of the world, and scholars believe that it was in part of Arabia. So, of course, he will submit to you because you bless him. You've bought his obedience. Now, let me throw this question out to you. When you come to church, is it because you think that if you didn't come to church, you wouldn't go to heaven? So you go to church because you're going to heaven. If that's the case, then God has bought your obedience by promising heaven to you. That's not biblical, by the way, but okay, so God cannot do anything. You've bribed him. Remove your protection and he will curse you. What can God do? If you're accused of, if they slander against you, can you answer? Can you clear your name? Nobody will. You can't do it. Somebody else has to stand up and defend your honesty. So God says, go, take everything away from him. Right there, in the first chapter of the first book of the Bible, it tells us who is behind all the oppression and all the poverty and all the suffering in the world, including Ukraine and Russia. It's not politicians. They are agents of Satan. I shouldn't say that on the day that we are voting, but but unknown to them, that's what's going on in this world. Satan is the Lord. It's the master. He manipulates. Can he manipulate believers? Yes, he manipulated Peter, who denied Christ. And Jesus said to Peter, away from me, Satan. Peter, not just anybody, Peter. So don't ever be cheeky about it. Satan can manipulate, you can manipulate me. But going back there, so he hits Job left and right. Job loses everything. Everything. And if you read that story properly, you'll find that every single thing that he hits Job with is exactly what the world is hurting from today, but on a cosmic scale. Same thing. Burglary. Okay, when those burglars came, bandits came and took away the animals, the domestic animals. What did the report say? They came and killed all your servants. I was the only one that escaped, the messenger. Killing herders, shepherds. What does that leave behind? How many widows? How many orphans? How many people overnight, no job, no money, no security? When we read Job's story, we never go beyond Job. Job gets hurt, and through Job, a whole community gets hurt. That's the way Satan works. And then he comes again, and God says, where do you come from? Well, I own the place, I control it. And God says, no, you've done everything to this man, and he has not flinched. Oh, yeah, of course, he won't touch him in his health. And Satan does that. So he lost property, money, investment, house, children, everything. He's got only his health, and he gets sick of a sickness for which there's no cure. And then he loses the closest thing to his emotion. His other half, his better half, says, curse God and die. What is he left with now? What is he left with? Nothing. And it all comes from God? From whom? From Satan. Right there's a lesson for you and I when we tend unconsciously, unwittingly to ask God, hey God, I've been faithful with my tithe and offerings. How come I've lost my job? What are you doing? You're becoming an agent of the adversary, blaming God. Don't we do these kinds of things? We do. I do it too. And we've got to think. So then, Satan has slandered God by saying, this guy loves you because of all those blessings. Now he's going to come with 2 more slanders. 4 friends come. And the first 3, 7 days, they keep quiet, respecting Job's sufferings. Then they start talking to Job. And if you read their conversation with Job, it can be summarized in one line. God is punishing you because you have sinned. You've done it in such a way that nobody knows that you have sinned, but God knows, now he's punishing you. What does that say about God? I remember as a kid, my father was a minister, and we had to go to church, not because I wanted to, but because if I didn't, they would say the pastor's kid wasn't there. I mean, I've been through that kind of thing too. And people would have these kinds of things, and I would not like it, the slander against the church. So I would not go to church one time, felt guilty, and then in my prayer, Father, I apologize, I'm sorry I didn't go to church today, I let you down, but I promise for the next 2 months I'll be there every Sabbath. Have you ever prayed like that or thought of praying like that? When you don't do something for God, then you compensate? We all do that. You won't admit, but we all do that. Even the pastor. Pastors do it more often than everybody else. But anyway, at least I do. But that's the story. So the friends come and say, God's way of dealing with people is retributive. You do good, you get reward. You do bad, you get zapped. And that's what we preach now when we do evangelism. Keep the Sabbath to be part of the right church so you can go to heaven. We don't say it in those words, but that's the intention very often. If you don't join this church, the other church, that one over there, that's the mark of the beast. Don't go there, come over here. We are the elect. We need to change our ways of doing evangelism. We don't bring people in so they go to heaven. You'll see why we do it. So, slander, the 3 friends, retributive. God is in the retributive business. He blesses those who do good. He curses those who do bad. Then the 4th one comes. He takes another tack, another angle. He says, Job, you are too arrogant. You want to know God's mind. You don't question God. Let God do his thing. You may never understand, but let him do his thing. Now, most Christians have this kind of attitude. Don't ask questions from God. And let me raise this point. If this brother and I are to have a friendly relationship, and I ask him a question that he refuses to answer, can I trust him? Can you? Trust means openness. God says, come and let us talk together. That's in Isaiah. And I will tell you, you raised your questions and I will answer. So the first slander, God bribes. The second slander, God blesses and God curses. The third slander, God is a closed block of marble that you cannot penetrate. He won't tell you, just accept. Well, that kind of a God I don't like. And I'm very open about it. A God that doesn't want to answer the questions I have, why would I worship him? He may not be able to explain the whole thing to me because I'm limited, but he should give me some sort of an indication. And that's what the whole Bible is about, actually. So, 3 slanders, bribery, retribution. God doesn't have to share with you. When I preach like that, somebody says, well, there's a verse that says, my thoughts are higher than your thoughts. You know that. It doesn't mean that you can't understand. It means the way God thinks about things you may not want to accept. Who would have thought, God's thought, that to save the world he would have sent his son to die? Would that ever come to the mind? That's why God's thought is higher. But he shows you. Anyway, let's keep going. So Satan slanders God's character, and he does it by inflicting pain and raising questions. I was telling you a few minutes ago that the question of pain and suffering is there in people's mind. Back 300 years before Christ, there was a Greek philosopher by the name of Epicurus. Epicurus tackled that question. He said, we believe in a God that's good and powerful. If God is good and powerful, how do you explain evil? Have you ever asked yourself that question? We have. It's an existential question. If God is good and powerful, how do you explain evil? So he came up with two. He said, either God is good but not powerful, then why do I need him? Or God is powerful but not good, then he's bad. And on that basis, Epicurus rejects God, and the Western world today has exactly the same attitude towards God. Atheism. Read that book by Dawkins, The God Delusion. That's what he distills in there. God, I don't need him. If he's there, what is he there for? So oppression, going back to the word oppression, is Satan's favorite weapon to slander God. And he's developed oppression on such a scale that today the whole world is hurting. Listening to the news about the Ukraine war, yesterday, the Western government, America, and I'm not blaming America, I'm just giving you history here, has voted to give $46 billion to help Ukraine. Happy about that. 4 months ago, the UNESCO, UN, director of food program for a famine-stricken land. Right now there's a famine, 5 years of drought in East Africa, 20 million people are going to die if there's no food that comes in. They asked America for $1 billion and they wouldn't get it. And yet Mr. Biden goes to church every Sunday and all Americans say, in God we trust. I'm hitting hard here because Christians need to stand up and be real Christians. Okay, so the question comes then, when did it all start, this thing about oppression? Now we jump from the book of Job to the book of Revelation. When did it start? Where did it start? There was war in heaven, and the morning star, by the way, the morning star is not just any other angel, it was the angel closest to God. If you look at the description in Isaiah and in Ezekiel, you were the seal of perfection. In other words, everyone else that God created were to be measured by the beauty of the morning star, the seal of perfection. And then it says, you walked among the fiery stones. That's a metaphor to say you were in my own presence, because God is a devouring fire. So when it says that Lucifer walked on fiery stone, he was the closest to God. And then it went to his head. He thought, well, close to God is not enough. I want to be above God. And he starts slandering, insinuating things in the minds of the angels who all were there, listening to him, because he was the top brass there. By the way, you may say, what about Jesus? I wish I had another time to spend with you to explain why Jesus didn't stand up then. Why would they choose Lucifer over Jesus? There's a good study to be done there, but that's another time if I ever come back here. Anyway, he is so clever, so cunning, so persuasive that he gets how many to follow him? 1/3 of the angels. Now, are angels dummies? To be able to convince angels that he is right, what he said about God must have made some sense. Otherwise, they would not have. And there's war in heaven. They are thrown out of heaven, and they come down. In Revelation chapter 5, I saw a star falling into the abyss. Abyss is the name for the earth. In the beginning, there was the abyss, and God created. So Satan is flung down. So let's put the two together. Job answers the question, where does poverty and pain and suffering come from? It comes from Satan. Who was Satan? The morning star. And he got a third of the angels with him and was sent down here. So all this happens before creation. When did that start to affect the human race? What book, what chapter? Genesis chapter 3. You know, we Christians say that God is love and God is love. But there's something further down. Can you love if you're not free? Can you really love if you don't enjoy freedom? What? Do you have children? I enjoyed your song this morning. It was beautiful. Do you have children? How old are they? 19. Okay. Now, if one day your son, I don't know if it's a son or a daughter, says, Dad, I love you because I have to. Would that be very pleasing to hear? Daddy, I love you very much because I have to. I can't do otherwise. Well, that is what we're talking about here. Loving God for who He is, not because of what He does, not because of His blessings, getting to know God. And Satan goes for that. That God, you can't trust Him. And Adam and Eve fall for it. That's the story of the two trees. By the way, again, when you read the Bible, please stop at every word. It's important. Very interesting. Where was the tree of life? Louder. In the middle, where was the tree of knowledge of good and evil? How do you put two trees in the same spot in the middle? Have you ever asked yourself that question? What it's saying is, you have to choose what will be the center of your life, one or the other. Every word is important. But then, in chapter 2, verse 15 of Genesis, it says, God created man and told man, gave man the job of tending the garden. You know that. But there's another word added to it. Now, in your English translation, it's not a good translation. In the Hebrew, it says, God gave man the responsibility of tending the garden and protecting the garden. Brand new garden, freshly created, beautiful. Why protecting? There was an enemy lurking. Now you can put Job, Revelation 12, Genesis 3 together. And you have the history of this world. Are you still with me? Okay, so Adam had to protect, but he doesn't. Actually, there is this usual understanding that when Eve sinned, she was by herself. Some Hebrew scholars that have done in-depth study of the text says that Adam was standing next to her but didn't say a word. Which is why Paul says Eve was deceived, Adam was not. So, husbands, stop blaming your wife for that original sin. I hear this so often, it's all because of the women, you know. No, it's all because of man. So, Adam makes the wrong choice, and that wrong choice condemns the whole world. Paul explains in Romans chapter 5, verse 12, when Adam sinned, who sinned? The whole world sinned. You were not there. How did you sin when you weren't there? Because Adam, in theological terms, is the federal head of the human race. When God created Adam, He created you in Adam at the time. His sin was not, you didn't sin like Him, but you sinned in Him. Is it a secret, Pastor? It's your birthday today. When you were born some years ago, 43 years ago, I don't know. You just came out, but you had been created already in Adam. Had Adam died on that day, the day you eat, you die, where would we be? So we were all created in Adam, and when Adam sinned, he turned all of us into sinners. Now, I didn't participate in that willingly. I wasn't there. So I can say to God, God, I have a sinful nature because you created me in Adam. Couldn't you have created me out of Adam right from the beginning? And God says, yeah, I did create you in Adam, but I'm going to send another Adam. If you choose to be in that second one, your whole history gets repaired. That's the two Adams in the Bible. Your choice is, do you want to remain in the first Adam, or do you want to move from the first to the second Adam? I'm giving you the whole Bible here in one sermon. Every story in the Bible can hang on that tapestry. If you go to France, there's a place called Bayeux, and they have a 70-meter-long tapestry that describes the war between England and France in 1066, the Battle of Hastings. The ladies of France embroidered 70, and it's fantastic to watch that history from embroidery. Well, that's what I'm doing. I'm painting a picture of the history of this world, seen from God's perspective. And so, in that history, Satan's attack against God is still the same. Slander. Where is your God? I remember when I grew up in Mauritius, and in Mauritius, it's a mixed population. We have Hindus, and one branch of Indians, they have fire walking ceremony. I mean, it's, from here to the door, that wide, twice that width, a pit of ember, burning fire. And they have special prayers for about a week, then they walk on it. They don't get burned. And they turn to us Christians and say, can your God do that? What do you tell them? You see how they see God? God protects them. You're not Indian. If you walk there, you get burned. God will punish you. That's the bottom line in the great controversy. Who is God? So, let's start wrapping up. John is given a vision. In chapter 5 of Revelation, it says, I saw an open door and I was asked to look beyond. So John looks in through the open door and he sees catastrophes. 4 times it gets repeated. 4 seals, 7 seals, 7 trumpets, 7 bowls, 7 plagues. They all cover the same period of history, each one adding more details about the suffering that this world is hurting from, all inflicted by the dragon. None of the world's suffering comes from God. Even when you have the flood that came the other day, remember, the whole world is under the control of Satan, even nature. Do I have a Bible verse for that? Yes, I do. Romans chapter 8, verse 20. The nature is yearning to be freed from the slavery that human beings have put it under. Remember, God gave Adam dominion over the world, tend the garden, and once he gave up on that, who took all of that? Satan. Nature is under the control of God. I'm glad that God puts his hand sometimes. But everything this side of eternity is under the control of God. So that's in that context. Now, I hope that I've painted the context of that cosmic conflict. Do you get that? Within that cosmic conflict, God calls you young people over there and adults over here, elderly over there. He says, I want you to be one of my warriors in that cosmic, and the weapons you're going to get are the spiritual gifts. Do you know your spiritual gift? So how do you fight for God if you don't know your gift? Because that's the weapon that God gives you. Our church, and most churches have gotten away from that when we do this thing called nomination. Nomination has never been done in terms of spiritual gifts. It's been done in terms of availability. Brother, are you available to be an elder next year? And everybody on the board says, yes, this brother, he comes from France, he must be a good man. Or whatever. And we elect him. But deep inside, he doesn't feel called to be an elder, but because of the pressure of being a good Christian and the expectation, he accepts it. But for a whole year, he hates being an elder. And the next year, when nomination committee comes around, please, pastor, make sure you don't ask me to be an elder. Now, I've been a pastor for 46 years. I know these stories in and out. I'm a minister. Back then, we used to do in-gathering. Anybody remembers in-gathering? How was it done back then? I hated it. I've never done in-gathering in my whole life. As a minister, I didn't do it. Give me a church, give me 1,000 people to talk to. I feel completely at ease. Don't ask me to knock at doors. I don't. I tell them, God did not give me that skill. I know a person in my church who was so good at it, she would go on Saturday afternoon in front of the stadium before a footy game, and there with her can and her paper, she would ask with a big smile, and she was a champion in gatherer in my church. Every Saturday during the footy season, she would get money. She was the only one that did that, nobody else, because some of the people swore at her. But she was able to take it all. So when you serve in the church, I shouldn't even say that in that way. When God gives you a gift, it's to be part of a church that's engaged in a cosmic conflict. And the stakes are high, because the stakes has to do with God's name has been slandered and muddied. And God calls on the church to give to the world a new picture of his face. That's what the church is about. If you Billy Graham has this very funny little statement. He says, God's church is made up of two kinds of people: pillars, caterpillars. Pillars support the church, caterpillars crawl in and out every Sunday morning. So who are you? Pastor, how many pillars do you have? How many caterpillars do you have in this church? You see why I'm telling you that I'm not coming back, otherwise you'd kill me? But that's the church, brother. Pillars, and that's from the word, that's from Timothy. You are the pillar of truth. And who is truth? God. So I'm supporting God in the battle against evil. God needs me, God needs you to clean his name of the mud that's been slanged or slung, whatever it is in English. I speak French usually, against him. That's what it's about. So, why did we start with oppression and suffering? And why did I say on Judgment Day God will say, have you given? Because when you come close to somebody to help that person in his or her particular situation, and you use the gift that God's given you, and you alleviate that pain, the Spirit is working, and that person might say, why do you do it? And then that gives you a chance to talk about God. That's what Jesus did. Ellen White says he healed, he fed, and then he brought them into the kingdom. That should be what the church does. So, not just to do the thing that you do here, that's part of it, yes, but it's much, much, much bigger than all that. And you can understand, or you can see how when I talk about it, I am excited about being part of a church. You know, I don't look at myself as an ethnic person from a country. I look at myself as being somebody part of God's church. Forget Yugoslavia, forget Fiji, forget everything. That's gone, that belongs to this broken world. You are part of God's church, in which there is no more any distinction between Jews and Gentiles, women. You know the text in Galatians. And yet we still fight along ethnic lines. Don't we? It's time, brothers and sisters. So, let's bring this to a close. I had only two texts for you. One is in Ephesians 3 verse 9. I think it's going to show. That's it. And to make all see what is the fellowship of the mystery, which from the beginning of the ages has been hidden in God, who created all things through Jesus Christ. Please continue. Let no one deceive you by any means, for that day will come, not unless falling away comes first and the man of sin is revealed. What is the work of the church? To reveal to the world the man of sin, so that they can compare between the man of sin is Satan and God. But that's the second text. I had another text on Ephesians. This one is in Thessalonians. It doesn't matter. Ephesians says, God called the church into existence, so that through the church, his manifold wisdom. Now, manifold is the English word for a Greek word that means many-colored wisdom of God. In Revelation, John has a vision of God, and there's something around the throne. What is it? A rainbow. How many colors in a rainbow? That's the one you see. There are many more colors in the rainbow that you can't see. The many wisdom of God. And I feel a little bit upset sometimes when some people that I respect a lot and love a lot use the rainbow as a flag to mean something else. But anyway, that's another story. But the many-colored wisdom of God, you can't start showing that to the world if you yourself have not seen it first. Getting to know God to that extent. And so the text says, to show to the principalities in heavenly realm the manifold wisdom of God. Principalities in heavenly realm has two meanings in the Bible. One, it's the angels of God, the unfallen. It also means the fallen angels. Those that have followed the slender, 1/3 of them. God says, I want my church to show to that 1/3 who I really am, because they were misled. Does that strike you as strange that God needs you to enlighten the minds of angels? Does it? There's a text in the Bible that says that angels have a deep yearning to delve deeper into the things of God, and Peter says they'll know it by the church. You know, eternity is going to be a fantastic experience where we will share our stories. How did God pluck us out? And how he turned us into warriors into the cosmic battle. Can you imagine? Right there, there's about 150 people, each one with a different story. Let me drive it home. When Paul speaks of his conversion, he says, wretched man that I am, who will free me from this body of death? Then he says, blessed be God. In him there's... Before you got baptized, did you ever feel that you were a wretched woman? Who will free me of this body of death? Because we don't feel like that, baptisms become a ritual that has no meaning. All of us have been baptized. How many of you remember the date? Some of you may. Most of you don't, because it's just one of those things. Well, baptism is God plucking you out of that wretchedness, and when you come out of the water, Pastor, that's something I think should be done in our church. In the first church in Paul's time, when the people came out of the water, they lifted their arms and they said, Abba. They could call God Father when they came out of the water of baptism. That's what church is about. We've got to become excited about church. So, in that text that's here, it's about God talking about a time when this will be done. But there's something interesting in that text where it says, the son of iniquity, or the man of iniquity, right now he's being forbidden to do his job. Something is blocking him from doing it. And when you study it, God is stopping Satan from showing who he is, because God counts on the church to do that. When the church will show it, then God will let Satan do his thing. And you know what he does? If you go to Corinthians chapter 10, he will appear as an angel of light. Can you imagine if today, sister, an angel of light came on Sabbath morning and stood there glorious looking and says, I am Jesus? You'd tend to believe that, yes. But then he says, but you know, it should be Sunday, not Saturday. That would be the hint. But if you don't know the text, what hint do you have? I mean, what weapon do you have? We need to get deeper into our beliefs so we can answer Satan when he appears like that. It would be so convincing that the world will think that it's Jesus that's coming. I'm not making that up. That's in the Bible, and Ellen White describes it even more. On that day, then the world will know who is the deceiver, who is the reality, because the church will have done its work, showing to the universe the multicolored wisdom of God. You know, when I think about it, I feel so humble that he would use me, a sinner, with all kinds of terrible history in my background, and say, Eddie, I've pulled you out of that, and I'm making you a soldier in my army in this cosmic battle. But you don't fight with the weapons of Satan, which is violence. You fight with love, and you fight with love, and you fight with love and compassion. even if you die in the process. The 8th beatitude, which we forget, says, blessed are you if you are what? Persecuted for righteousness. In other words, we have the 6th one, which are the character description. We have the 7th one, which is the action, peacemaker. The 8th one, God says, when you stand up to be a peacemaker, Satan is coming after you. And we know the history of the church, all the persecuted to the lions and you know that. And even today, you're not thrown to the lions, but you might lose your job because of Sabbath or some of your beliefs. But Paul says, in all this we are more than conquerors. But conquering not with violence. Conquering. How did God conquer sin? Violence or a lamb that was slain? A lamb that was slain. Revelation is 2 powers, dragon, Michael. The Michael part is interesting. It says, I wept, John, and the elder says, don't weep, because the Lion of the tribe of Judah is victor. But then when he sees, does he see a lion? What does he see? A lamb. So forget everything about position, about power. God is not in that kind of power. You know, we are so wrapped in the love of power that it's hard to fight against it. I was saying that this morning, and I say to you, what in this world doesn't have power and money as its base? Can you come up with anything that the world offers that is not either power or money? You won't, there isn't. As an Aussie, you like footy. What is footy about? One team being more powerful than the other? I like sports, but when it comes to that level, where they get hundreds of millions of dollars to bump into each other, and that's violence, that's physical violence. The worst thing is that each team goes on their knees in America and they pray, God, give me the victory. You've seen American football do that all the time? What do they think of God? Then they go and bash each other. That's what it is. I enjoy watching a game, but then I think, Eddie, what are you enjoying? You're enjoying seeing people battering each other. If they were to do that on the street, they'd be arrested and jailed, yes or no? And yet we applaud it on a Sunday afternoon. It's time, brothers and sisters, that we get a grasp of what the church is in that cosmic battle, and we don't leave any opening to Satan to get to us and make us believe that violence, power, money, reputation is what it's about. It's not. It's humility, service, compassion service that is redemptive. And if you really think that you're part of God's church, then it behooves to you to discover what gift God has given you. That then you can be part of his army with that particular gift. And you can say to the pastor, God didn't give me that gift, so don't give me that position. And the pastor should understand that, and he will. But then you're serving out of gladness because this is who God made you. So this afternoon we're going to start understanding all that, and we have tools that have been developed by the General Conference to help every church member discover what they call their servant profile. And when you know your servant profile, you can serve according to that. Let me read to you something that I wrote here, and that will be the closing. I call it the historical timeline. We are in history, right? Okay, historical timeline. Pay attention. Number 1, Revelation 12. The fall of the morning star. Cast out before the world was created. Number 2, creation, chapter 1 and 2 of Genesis. Everything that God did was very good. 1 and 2. Third thing in history, chapter 3, temptation and fall. Fourth thing is Genesis chapter 4, where it describes how humanity spirals into sinfulness. There are 4 things that are mentioned. Chapter 4, there's the murder of Cain. Then there's his grandson Lamech, who says, I will avenge myself of anybody that does anything wrong to me. Then there are 3 things. It says one son was the father of all those who have cattle. Now, it's not wrong to have cattle, but what he's saying is those who think that their security is in possession. Then the father of those, another son, the fathers of those who beat iron. What did you beat iron for back then? Swords and weapons. And third, the father of all those who play music, entertainment. To this day, violence, money, entertainment, property, reputation is still driving the world. Yes or no? And we have an election today. I listen to them like you have, and I haven't heard anything interesting except one saying that the other one will be worse if he gets elected. Basically, that's what it is. Don't vote for him because it's going to be bad for you. Vote for me. Now, your choice, you vote for whoever you want. But that's the world. So number 4 is the spiraling down. Number 5, the birth of Christ is announced. Number 6, the dragon wants to destroy Christ when he gets born. Through whom was he going to do that when Jesus was born? To destroy the baby Jesus. Through whom? Herod. That's Revelation chapter 12. Herod is right in there without being named. Then, number 7, Jesus establishes the church. That's in the timeline. And the dragon makes war against the church. That's number 8. Number 9, God is preventing everything from happening because he's waiting for his church to stand up. When that is done, the first resurrection comes and the righteous are taken into heaven, the dead stay dead, and the dragon is left on his own. The Bible says he's been chained because he's got nothing to do. Have you asked yourself the question, when God chains the dragon, why does he release him afterwards? Wouldn't it have been better to keep him chained? Well, he had to give the dragon the last opportunity to show who he is, so that forever the question of God's character is settled, never to be questioned again. So, number 10, the dragon is chained. Then the next one is the Jerusalem comes down, Satan is released, and what does he do? Second resurrection, he marshals all the unrighteous to do what? To do what? Come on, you know that. To invest the city of God. Let me make this very poignant to you. My father passed away after almost 49 years of ministry. If you go back to my country in Mauritius, a third of the church will tell you our grandfather were converted by Pastor Johnson. To me, my father is, if I'm a minister today, it's because of him. I have immense admiration for Dad. Now, let me ask you a question. If I'm in the New Jerusalem, and after a few days of walking around, I suddenly say, where's Dad? And Dad isn't there. And I keep looking and Dad isn't there. Who do I turn to ask a question? Hey, God, you made a mistake. That was a good man, my dad. I know him. And God has to reveal. That's when the righteous are given judgment, to reveal what others, because if God doesn't reveal to me what my dad has done, I will forever think he should have been here. And what does that start all over again? The blaming. So God says, no, he's not there, not because I didn't want him here, but let me show you who he was. And then I say, but God, had he seen you in person, maybe he would have converted. God says, okay, the New Jerusalem comes down, and on top of the city, who is there? God. All the unrighteous around see God, and what do? They still invest the city. And when I see that, I say, God, okay, I understand why my dad isn't there, but he's going to plague me with sadness throughout the rest of eternity. So God says, I will wipe away all tears from your eyes. That's the story of the church that you and I need to buy into. But the last question, God will wipe away our tears. Who will wipe away his tears when he remembers about the son of the morning that started this whole mess? Nobody wipes God's tears. He stays with it throughout eternity. If you got that picture of the church and get excited about being part of God's church, forget about these other 32,000 Christian churches exist today, each one saying we are the best. And what is that doing to God's reputation? You can't agree among yourself. Why do you want us to believe in your God? So it's a glorious thing to be part of God's church. And that's what he calls you for. Young people, older people, baptized people. Because the younger ones haven't taken their position yet. They're following their parents, which is nice. But baptism is important because that's the day you stand up and say, wretched man that I was, who will free me from this body of death? Then the pastor takes you down and you die and he brings you back and you're a new creation and you can say, Father. Because now you're part of God's family. God bless you.